Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Earlier this week, Belgian federal authorities arrested 3 suspects in Antwerp for allegedly planning a jihadist-inspired terrorist attack targeting politicians, including Flemish nationalist leader and Prime Minister Bart De Wever. To tell you more, I'm joined by Paulina Piasecka, director of the Terrorism Research Center at the Civitas University in Warsaw. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
So Europe has been so focused on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and further incursions in Europe that suddenly hearing of a jihadist-inspired terrorist attack in Europe is a little bit shocking. What stands out to you most about this story so far?
Well, first and foremost, probably it's the drones. It's the tactics that the perpetrators or almost perpetrators were trying to use, which is the tactics that we have become, unfortunately, intimately close with because of the developments in the Ukrainian front. And so it's sort of new when it comes to the attempts of political killings. But then on the other hand, it's probably also interesting, as you've mentioned, the sudden resurge of Islamist-fueled attacks. And it is really interesting to see it smack in the middle of the, well, not war-torn Europe, but Europe on whose threshold there is a full-blown war.
Yes, almost, I suppose, on the cusp of World War III. Sometimes we hear that in Analysts. Hopefully that won't happen in a full-blown way. But let's just go back to these suspects. The 3 of them are very, very young. One of them is underage. And I wanted to ask, what do you think is actually shaping the minds of these young people? And also, how do we know that this attack was this preempted attack was jihadist in style? And just before you answer these questions, I just wanted to go to a soundbite from the federal prosecutor, Anne Fransen.
3 young adults, born in 2000, 2002 and 2007, all residing in Antwerp, were deprived of their liberty. This judicial intervention is part of an investigation into, among other things, an attempted terrorist murder and participation in the activities of a terrorist group. There are indications that the intention was to carry out a jihadist-inspired terrorist attack targeting politicians. During the search, an improvised device was found at the home of one of the suspects that bears strong similarities to an improvised explosive device, but was not yet operational at the time.
So just going back to my question, very, very young people, one of them underage. What is shaping the minds of these young people, and how do we know that this was a jihadist-style attack?
Well, jihadist style, and it's important to stress that what the prosecutor said was actually that it's jihadi-inspired. And we might also express it by saying that it's jihadi-styled, but we don't really know whether or not it was in fact inspired by an Islamist cell or Islamist organization. What we do need to remember about is that the disinformation can also take form of something that we used to call open source jihad. So a situation in which a person, a perpetrator to be, learns how to carry out an attack and fuels their hatred and their radicalization from the sources that are actually available online, which might mean that those young people were targeted in the process of radicalization, both by the Islamist organization, as well as somebody who thought that that would be the best way to incentivize them in order to strike against the Belgian government. And so it might be jihadist style or jihadi inspired. It doesn't have to be at all caused by or really fueled by an Islamist organization or Islamist movement.
Very interesting. Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever was one of the targets, or perhaps the main target of this planned attack. Tell us why you think he attracted this attention. We know that he's not just the Prime Minister, but he also leads this nationalist group, the New Flemish Alliance, and it isn't the first time that his life has been at risk.
Well, the party is something that we would, to say it in a benign manner, it is a fairly right-wing, some would say fundamentally right party. And what fuels the anti-migration movements, quite often creating strong tensions within individual social groups, is actually quite often the narratives of the right-wing parties that do stem from this idea that the easiest way to inspire people and motivate people to vote for you is to instigate their fear against the newcomers. So that would be actually aligned, logically aligned, in choosing him as a potential target, as a leader of a party that is instigating fear and rejection of the migrants. And big parts of those immigration groups into Europe are actually people from this cultural/religious circle that is closely connected with Islam and Islamic culture.
So do we know anything about the identities of these three suspects? Do we know whether or not they are actually migrants, or perhaps these are Belgian citizens who perhaps have been radicalized? Do we know anything about that?
Well, from the sources that I've read through, they have not been identified as to their background and nationality. But what we might need to notice is something that we've been observing for quite a long time in Europe in 2010s and 2015, 16, 17, when we were talking about the attacks in Paris and in Verviers, which actually that was a terrorist attack that almost took place in Belgium, that quite often we're dealing with something that the experts of terrorism calls homegrown terrorism, which might be actually a person that has the citizenship of a country in which they live, in which they carry out the attack, and they are the second generation migrants, which means that they are children of the first wave of migrants coming to those Western countries. And this homegrown terrorism, the terrorism of the second generation, is actually, if that would be the case, that would also not be the first time that we saw this type of process, where the second generation of migrants, because of the quite often marginalization of those groups, the lack of easy access to education and good jobs, do become radicalized, not only because of the ideology, but also because of the social circumstances that they feel are oppressive.
But do you think that perhaps a lack of assimilation of that first generation also plays a role and plays into the challenges that you've just described?
I definitely think so. Now, the problem is that I think generally, we as Europe, we didn't come with the right way to address the issue of inviting in and then making room for the people from the other than our own cultural circles. Assimilation is the word that would probably in some circles be treated as something that is too strong of a process, that we should be tolerant towards and accepting towards other cultures and let people and other groups keep their own culture and their own worldview. And so that there would be probably those who would talk about assimilation. There would be those who would talk about integration. There would be those who would talk about multiculturalism. The problem with any of those tactics of addressing the issue of having a group of foreigners with a different cultural, religious, or political background is that we don't have a tested approach that would be universally effective. So you're quite right in saying that it might be also second generation resentment and not only second generation and not the second generation radicalization.
I just wanted to move on because there's something that caught my attention. According to the BBC, Belgian reports say that the eldest suspect was freed on Thursday night due to lack of evidence. I just wanted to ask how this is possible when we are looking at real terrorist threats in the country.
Well, that depends on what were the leads that made police arrest those three particular people. We do need to remember that we have absolutely no idea what the operational background was. So we don't know whether they were arrested on the background of some taken over communication in cyberspace, or maybe there have been some processes connected with the video or audio surveillance. Unless we know just a little bit more about this process that led to the arrest, it's very hard to divine what might have led to this final decision that, nope, we don't have enough evidence. It might be the fake identity, stolen identity on the internet. It might be somebody impersonating another person and then in an effective manner redirecting the interests of the law enforcement and intelligence services. It might also be that at some point we will learn that it was to be a political manifestation, but without the attempt to actually kill anybody. That's the problem with terrorism. It's at the same time the use of force, but also the threat to use force. And quite often, the most difficult part of counteracting or minimizing the results of such terrorist attempts to destabilize country socially or politically is actually not the criminal proceedings, but the judicial proceedings, because we do want to protect the rule of law. And it's very, very hard to prove that somebody had a real intent to cause harm.
Absolutely.
And, terrorism is quite often about intentions.
Absolutely. Just very briefly, we see that Anne Fransen also mentioned during the press conference that there are currently 80 terrorism investigations opened in Belgium this year, which is more than the total number of cases in 2024. So it shows that Belgium is actually dealing with an escalation of terrorist cases. What should be done? What should Belgium be doing right now to move forward in dealing with this problem?
Well, this is where actually my academic background, rather than the former employee of the public administration, will come to play. There is, I think, a lot to do in researching the background of this rising level of threat. Either we can identify those triggers that are pushing more and more people towards undertaking those violent attempts, or we'll learn at some point that the number of arrests of potential perpetrators rose because of, for example, change in how we assess the threat, and the things that would not allow the law enforcement to move last year. The scale of alert has been risen to the extent that the activities of the law enforcement are triggered much more easily. So cooperate with experts, try to really assess what is the source of the rise of the incidents, and whether or not this rise is not directly connected with what we do and how we react to specific levels of threats.
Okay, Paulina Piasecka, Director of the Terrorism Research Center at Civitas University in Warsaw. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that wraps up World Talks. Thank you so much for being with us, and stay tuned for more news and features on TVP World. Goodbye.